more recently I've gotten into trauma therapy. And when I was saying earlier that the things that come to us from the Prophet Muhammad, we tend to, sometimes we think of it as being things that are metaphorical, or we take it as meaning, not maybe as literal. But one of the things he said, after being in homeopathic practice for maybe 25, almost 30 years, there was a sort of a typical profile I would see, and this would be, here's a typical picture. Usually a woman, sometimes mid, but more often a woman, abused severely as a child, usually sexually abused as a child, and emotionally very, very troubled. Sometimes physically very hypersensitive, extremely hypersensitive physically, what they call environmentally sensitive. Almost all of those people, as some of you may know, were abused as children. That's one of the pieces that play into their pathology. So these people, I would give them homeopathic remedies, I'd give them counsel. Sometimes they would be involved in spiritual practices, and still they were suffering. Still they were victims. Still they were drawing trauma to themselves. Still they were not fulfilled in their life, and it didn't seem fair to me. And I thought, Ya Allah, oh God, there must be a healing for these people. It's not fair that they were victims as children, they were victims as teenagers, they're victims in their 20s, and they're still victims again because they can't find their way out of this dilemma that they've been put into or they find themselves in. So I prayed I said, Allah, show me where this, where the healing, like I did when I first started studying medicine. And I tell you, when you want to know something and you don't find it in the books or from your teachers and from your friends, ask the source of all knowledge directly. Don't forget that. And so, I discovered at that time by a series of clear signs, synchronous events, I was led to discover this particular therapy, trauma therapy. It's based on the work of Peter Levine. Anybody know Peter Levine? Waking the Tiger. In the book, in the things you have there, I have a book list. And it was very difficult for me to make decisions on what I'd put on that book list, but that's one of the books on that list, Waking the Tiger. And there's a short little article by him in there. It's an alternative method, somatic method. Are you from when I say somatic, do people understand what I mean by that? Yes, no? Some do. The new wave in therapy for emotional problems is somatic. That is dealing with the emotional problem with the physical body, the neurology, and the physical body. And we'll talk more about that today, how that works. But it's an important piece, and especially for people who have an Islamic point of view, it's an important missing piece in the understanding of how you engage in therapy other than simply with talk or with catharsis or revisiting problems historically. Does that make you all understand what I mean by that? So I prayed to God. I said, show me where this therapy is. And it became clear. I found a therapist, and I did some work with him, and I said, this is what I was asking Allah for. And this has been my history. My own personal history has been, when I wanted to before I became Muslim, I'd studied many religions. I'd gone through all sorts of things in Berkeley. I'd gotten to a point where I felt very fulfilled and happy with my life, and I thought, what a wonderful thing life is, and how generous God has been. But there's something missing. What is it I didn't know? And I said, God, so I used to pray. I was a singer and a musician at that time, and I used to sing my prayer. So that was the method. So I used to, go out on my own, or sometimes in public I'd sing spontaneous prayers, but I used to go out in private and pray my prayers, but I'd sing it, oh God, show, and so for 1 week I was saying, oh God, forgive me. Forgive me for not being satisfied with all that you've given me. Forgive me for not being satisfied, but, please show me what this thing is that I feel is missing. And what it was that I was missing was something more dynamic and full and intense in terms of the actual acts of worship. And I somehow knew that inside because I was doing ritual theater where we were trying to reenact and recreate ritual that we could engage in as a community and engage the community in doing these. But we were making them up. We were taking them from this tradition, that tradition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was very beautiful and very powerful. So I prayed this, and then I went back to Berkeley and I met a man. At that time I was interested in Sufism, and I said to the man, I'm interested in Sufism, and he said, forget Sufism. He said, there's no Sufism, there's Islam. This is what Islam is. I mean, he was a Sufi too, and that was it. And he said, well, this is what Islam is, and I said, well, that's what I've been praying for. So for me, Dawah took about a half an hour. It was a half hour of this man saying, this is what Islam is, and I said, that's it. What do I do? And at that time, being in Berkeley at that time, he said, well, go take a shower right now. And I ran up to I was living in a house full of artists and painters and poets. And so I ran up to the bathroom to take a shower, and I opened the bathroom door, and there's 3 people in the bathtub together. And I said, I've got to take a... They said, come on in. I said, no. This won't work. So I managed to get them out of the bathroom and got the thing that turned the water on. And then someone pounds on the door and says, water's pouring out, there's a leak. So I had to turn the water off. So I realized, okay, something's conspiring against me doing this, so I've got to make it happen. So I got a pan of water to do my Gosa with. But the point I'm making here is that I asked Allah and I got a response. And I want to reiterate that when you need something and when you want to know something, so often I've been with people and they say, well, all we can do now is pray. No, it doesn't work. I tell you, it's better to turn that upside down. Pray first for whatever it is you want. Go to the source. I've had patients who are not Muslim. And one of the prescriptions I've given many people when they have a dilemma, I tell them to get up before dawn, sit, be aware of God's creation, be aware of you, just be present, and then ask reality, God, whatever term you want to use, ask for guidance. And it's interesting because I had a patient one time she kept getting better and better. I was treating her homeopathically. I'm going off on some tangents here, but I'll bring them back together if you have patience here, inshallah. I had a patient one time who she was getting healthier and healthier physically, and then she was working on her emotional health. And one day she started saying to me, she said, I really appreciated the homeopathic treatment. I feel really well, but I feel the need now for some spiritual practice in my life. Same place I was at, wanting more intense engagement in that activity, worshipful activity. And being a Muslim and being her physician, I didn't feel, it wasn't correct to say, well, check out Islam. I'm a Muslim. She knew I was a Muslim. So I said to her, well, get up at dawn. And I gave her this prescription. And then I didn't see her for about 3 months. And then I ran into her on the street and she was wearing hijab. And she told me that she got up at dawn and she asked God. And she said that day she went out and she met these people. She said everywhere she went, she got this message about Islam. And she said, this must be the one that I'm looking for. So I didn't have to personally do it. So I just want to reiterate it. So back to my story, this personality, this profile of the person who's been abused, repeatedly abused, and still is suffering. Homeopathy does not help. In psychotherapy for 12 years, reiterating the same issues. And as she puts it, I just saw my therapist today and I'm a wreck. So many issues have come up and I'm going through so much right now. And I'd see it year after year and she wouldn't make any improvement and no response on the homeopathy and not really able to guide her to any spiritual practices other than what she was already in. So praying to God. And so I was given an insight myself to this therapy I mentioned. Waking the Tiger happened to be the particular one. Somatic therapy. And I went and I did some work with a man who became my first teacher. And I realized that I was looking for healing for the trauma for these people But I realized at that time that I also had discovered and found the healing from my own trauma. And so this brought me back to what I was saying, that when we hear the hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there's a saying in which he said, when you make a dua, when you pray for someone else, when you make a dua for someone, the angels pray with you because you're asking for someone, not for yourself. The angels pray with you, and when the prayer is finished, they say, and Allah, God, give to the one who is asking that what she is asking for the people. And so this was like a twist. I suddenly had this insight, well, wait a minute, this is another meaning of that hadith, that I was praying for someone that their trauma should be healed, but I had the gift of discovering that also my own trauma was to be healed. And I had this extraordinary discovery that I was traumatized and didn't realize it. And from that point, I realized, as I began to study this particular thing, realized the degree and the extent to which we are all traumatized, individually and collectively, and how important that is. And that then in turn immediately plays into what I learned as a Hakim, which is we must understand, one, what our nature is, what health is about, and achieve some perspective on where we stand realistically. And I don't believe we've done that, for the most part, in the age in which we live. So, is this a stopping time? And when do we? We'll keep going. Let me see how this. Let's go to 12:15, but let me break it at there, and let me open up and try to get some interaction. I don't want to just yak all day. And I hope I won't be, because I really want to be able to communicate from my being to you what I feel is valuable and maybe important. But let's have some interaction, yes.